Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy, and welcome back to another movie review. I'm Chris Garner, joined today with Tate to give my review. This is going to be another solo one on my part. My review on The Nun, which is the latest installment, the latest spin-off in what is now referred to as the Conjuring Universe, because everything needs to be a cinematic universe nowadays. So why not get in on the horror craze as well? How are you doing today, Tate?
I'm okay. I am fully ready and prepared for Battle of the Brackets later, which I am very excited about. Make sure to tune in later for that, everyone. Yeah, other than that, I'm okay. I'm ready to talk about some Nun.
You're ready to talk about a movie that you haven't seen.
a movie that I haven't seen in a universe, a cinematic universe that I haven't seen any of the films of. So I'm really intrigued about this one.
Now, usually with these kind of reviews, you kind of like pitch questions and stuff, but you're literally fresh off the trailer, and I'm very happy to say that the jump scare got you in the trailer, as it did me when I did my reaction to it. But for anyone who doesn't know, the Nun is about a priest with a haunted past and a novice on the threshold of her final vows as sent by the Vatican to investigate the death of a young nun in Romania and confront a malevolent force in the form of a demonic nun. Pretty basic stuff.
Yeah, I've got a few questions immediately from the trailer, just alone from this film, and I'm sure that because are we saying this is spoiler review? Like we're going to go
not right from the off. So for everyone at home, I'm going to give spoiler free to begin with. So if you haven't seen it, you don't have to worry about me giving anything away that isn't in the trailer. Towards the end of the review, I'll let you know when I get to spoilers, and I'll give away some of the stuff, because there are moments that kind of link back to the other Conjuring movies and everything like that.
Okay, so I asked you 3 questions before even seeing this trailer, which made me think like what they should be really doing in this film. I think I asked you, wouldn't it be easier, because I'm pretty sure like this nun character is like a painting or something like that. From what I've gathered.
No, you're not overly right there. But
there is a painting of the nun, and you were saying it's evil, so you can't really do anything to it. So I was just saying, why didn't they just move away from the castle? Why didn't they just go somewhere else?
Okay, so this is going to take me onto like a whole other trajectory of kind of like horror things. And with horror films, a lot of the times, even like the classics, you kind of have to suspend your disbelief. If the family in the broken down car don't go to the evil looking castle, you won't have a horror movie, essentially. And then I realized I was kind of cliff noting the plot of Rocky Horror Picture Show there for a second. Very, very different movie. And you kind of have that with this one, but it does almost get laughable based on the premise of the plot. I will say beforehand, like my thoughts on the previous entries in the Conjuring universe. For me, modern horror is kind of a dying genre at this point. It feels like.
Well, you say that. I've read a couple of articles recently to say that horror is going through a revival at the moment. You've got the jump scares are starting to dissipate out because those kind of films aren't what people want anymore. People are going back towards the psychological horrors, the interesting kind of twisted, like mental horrors, with the likes of Get Out from last year, Mother. I know that Mother wasn't extremely well received, but those kind of films are pushing the boundaries of that area of horror, which is making it a little bit more popular.
If that's the case, then I'm all for that, because my favorite horror movies are the more psychological ones, are the ones that can be at times a very much a slow burn. Jump scares do have their place. A well-placed jump scare can be very effective. Texas Chainsaw Massacre does that element very, very well in its films. But for modern-day horror films, it seems like if you just crank the orchestra up really, really loud and spike it at that one moment and have something jump out, people qualify that as a horror film. Like, it's scary. I jumped out my seat, and that's startling to me. That's not horror. You can throw a bunch of those in there, and like they can be startling, but that to me isn't horror. They have to be used well. If you've got a director who knows how to, create a horror film and everything like that, they can be used very effectively. And if someone says, like, give me a good modern-day horror film, The Conjuring is always the first one I tend to go towards. I absolutely love the first Conjuring movie. The first 2, actually. Prefer the first one, though, to the second one. And I think that is entirely down to James Wan's directing. The guy has done the original Saw film. He's done the, oh, God, what they called? The other horror franchise.
Purge,
the Dream.
Activity.
No.
Nightmare on Elm
Street. Why am I blanking on this? Insidious, sorry. He's done the Insidious franchise, as well as the Conjuring franchise. And to me, James Wan is kind of like the new up-and-coming well, he's already made it, in my opinion, horror director. And you can definitely see his stamp on a lot of those movies, and he kind of pays homage to 70s style, you know, haunted house movies and things like that. And there's a lot of ingredients from those movies from decades ago that he utilizes in his new movies. The same, however, unfortunately can't be said for the various spin-offs that have spawned from this franchise, and they clearly are a cash grab. I don't think there's any two ways around that. I didn't like the first Annabelle movie that came out. Annabelle Creation I actually thought was pretty good. They do feel like they're trying to mimic the style of James Wan a little, and I thought that was the one that came the most, you know, close to matching his style. And then we have The Nun. It's kind of a running thing now with these Conjuring movies, where after you have your main entry Conjuring movie, it's kind of like the Star Wars franchise. You then have your spin-off related to a particular character.
Quick question, for a person who hasn't really seen the franchise, how is The Nun connected to the previous universe? Was the nun a evil spirit in one of the other films?
Yeah.
Because I know that Annabelle was from the first Conjuring film.
Yeah, the nun is actually a demon called Valak, who's a prominent force who haunts Vera Farmiga's character in The Conjuring 2. That's the first time that we saw the nun.
Okay.
And then obviously from that point, everything's kind of connected. So after The Conjuring 2, we got Annabelle Creation, which features obviously the doll from Conjuring 1. But in a post-credit scene of that, and there's some other things related to the movie, it does show Valak and the convent of nuns and the, you know, the chapel that we see in this movie. And there was a post-credit scene in Annabelle Creation as well, which was leading into this one to talk about the nun. So this is kind of a running thing now. You get your main entry Conjuring movie with a particular monster or demon in that, and then the next movie you get will be the spin-off.
So what's going to be the spin-off, the next spin-off monster? What do you reckon, if there is one?
So, I mean, we've got 2 Annabelle movies out. I think I heard rumors they're going to do an Annabelle 3, although where Annabelle Creation ends and sort of where we see the first Annabelle movie as well and how they're tied together, it feels like they pretty much mined the well, pretty much, of everything they can do with the Annabelle doll. We might get a Nun 2 if this is popular. I'm sure this is going to be popular. Horror films tend to do very, very well. And I know a lot of people have been really buzzed for this movie. We've got someone in the comments as well. TE3074 says, great, I'm looking forward to seeing The Nun. Hopefully this review won't change my mind. And I guess that's a good springboard than ever to go into the actual movie itself. Religious imagery is always creepy to me. Sort of like the power and like the sort of like not mythical, but like the mysticism of it. You can do some really dark, creepy stuff with religion, and the aesthetic of this movie is very good. You have your creepy chapel, you have your creepy nuns, you have your dark corridors filmed with a smoke machine on the floor. Everything like giant wooden creaky doors, everything's there for a good horror movie. Where I think this movie fails is its pacing. For a good horror movie, it has to be paced almost like a conductor with an orchestra. Like, you can have those like high intense moments where you have your jump scares and the horror scenes, but you have to have your build up as well. You have to set up character. You have to empathize with your characters, or at least be connected to them in some way, so that when they are in peril, you hope they get out of it or whatever. And I never had that with this movie. It felt like it was literally just a collection of seemingly unconnected segments, like horror segments. It was like, walks into a room and there's like a creepy apparition of a nun there. And then she turns around, turns back, and it's gone. End scene. Next scene, she's walking through a corridor and like a creepy kid and then like a snake will come out of his mouth. And then she'll like shake her head and it was all a dream. It was loads of these kind of dream imagery, is it real, isn't it real kind of segments played back to back to back.
Was the ending and it was all a dream?
No, the ending wasn't all a dream, but here's the thing, and some people might say this is a good thing. I don't know how much of this film actually happened and how much of it was just a vision. Most of this movie is just the demon visually fucking with the protagonists. There's not really many scenes that develop characters where there's a scene with just 2 characters talking. And that's one of the reasons that I really love the Conjuring films, is that I absolutely love the Warrens, the main couple, Patrick Wilson. Not Patrick. Well, is Patrick? No, hang on. It is Patrick Wilson, isn't it? The guy from Watchmen?
Yeah.
Yeah, him and
sure. Yeah,
him and Vera Farmiga's character, they're a really likable couple. They have a great chemistry. And when they go to the families in both movies, you really get a sense that they are desperate. Like, this family is breaking apart, whatever's terrorizing them or haunting them. You want to see the family come out of it. You like all the characters there. But with this one, You really don't. Your cast of characters in this movie is pretty much, you have the main priest guy who's hired by the Vatican to go and inspect this chapel, this convent that's been, you know, they know that some haunted stuff, some unusual stuff's going there, and he's kind of like the guy they always send in for like the kind of undercover religious missions.
So as a person who wants to critique the horror genre as much as possible, can they just turn around and say, okay, this place is now a like a amusement attraction, like they'll bring in people like, oh, come see the amazing demon and stuff like that in all these different houses and stuff like that?
The first two Conjuring movies, because that's kind of their premise. You have these paranormal sort of investigators and mediums and stuff that get called in by a desperate family to sort out whatever demonic. They're kind of like Ghostbusters, really. They're kind of Ghostbusters for hire. But I think with the spin-off films, you have your chance to do something unique and kind of standalone. And of course, it's going to tie in character-wise to the previous movies. But I think with these movies, they have the opportunity to do something different, which is why I'm kind of hesitant with these movies. Not going into spoilers, this movie, like the Annabelle movies, is bookended by a scene that links to The Conjuring. I think if you remove those scenes completely, you have your, you know, your solid kind of standalone movie there. But in terms of the cast of characters, you have your main guy, character of Father Burke, played by Damien Bircher, I think he's called. You have Sister Irene, who's played by Tayte Farmiga, who's actually Vera Farmiga's real life sister. I've got
to ask, was there a reason for that casting, or was it?
Not that I picked up in the movie. I don't know if this is a spoiler, but it's not really, because it's not giving anything away. They never make a correlation that the characters are related. Vera Farmiga's character from The Conjuring to Sister Irene's character in this. I don't know if Vera Farmiga pulled some strings to get a sister into a film project. I have no idea. And then you have your comic relief character who's called Frenchie. That's his nickname. He's a guy who, I think he's sort of like a salesman, like a vegetable salesman, and he stumbles upon the chapel, and then he kind of gets thrust into this adventure, I guess, this investigation with the two lead characters. And that's pretty much it. It's a very small cast of characters, and that could have been effective. Frenchie, you know, he is the comic relief character. He does throw some lines in there, but they kind of feel out of place. I think in terms of humor, this movie doesn't really have much. The other movies have had that element of humor somewhere in the movie. I didn't have a problem with that, though, with this movie. Like, you can have your serious film, but what I did have a problem was the lack of characterization. I didn't care for any of these characters. At any point, any of them could have got killed, possessed, or whatever.
Wow.
And I just didn't care, because the movie feels like a lot of short film segments just put back to back to back with no narrative through line. If you strip this movie down to its actual bare bones narrative, you could do this movie in about half hour, 40 minutes tops. And I think it's about an hour and a half.
That's pretty disappointing, mainly because with a lot of horrors, you just want that tension built up. You want the stories built up. If you feel like you like the characters, and if you feel like you can get on with the characters and you can get behind them, there's a lot more at stake, especially in horror films. If you have characters which are unlikable, I have a feeling that the shocks that came in the film, the jump scares, the scares they were aiming for, probably wouldn't have come as bad because you didn't care what happened to the character itself. So,
and in these segments, like, there's a lot of scenes where if they'd have dragged it out for a little bit longer, you could have built that tension up a lot more. In terms of the decor, in terms of the environments and stuff, there are some like beautifully made sets. Everything's like lit by candlelight. It's very dark. It's very creepy. You can see shadows, and you don't know if those shadows are part of the decor or if they're actually like something in the background. But even in terms of like the cameras and how it's covered, the shots aren't covered very well at all. There's a lot of scenes where you wish the camera would pull back.
Is that down to the direction? I'm assuming
cinematography, direction, maybe a combination of the two, but a lot of the film is close-ups. You're just sort of like following, like the camera's following someone behind down the corridor in front of them. There's never those vast moments like, this is comparing to like a way superior director, but Stanley Kubrick, for example, with The Shining. Think of all those POV shots where you really get that sense of isolation and, you know, like how vacuous the hotel is.
A lot of people immediately assume isolation can be done in two different ways: having a close-up on a person in a crowded space, or having a wide shot of a person in an empty space. But there are ways that directors have found to just create different ways of making you feel isolated, making you feel alone and scared. And I haven't seen as much of it in horror direction in recent years, which has been quite disappointing. I heard that this year's film Ghost Stories, which is apparently meant to be quite good, I've had it suggested to me by someone, was meant to be very, very good at doing just that, at making you feel isolated and making you feel actual tension within the film.
Yeah, and actually, like, the crowd that I went to see this with, there were a fair few people in there. I went to a 1:50 showing in the afternoon, and there was a decent amount of people in there. But I mean, I've been to every single one of these movies before with a similar sized crowd, and everyone's been into it. You can see people gasping. You can see people sort of like rearing up in their seats. Everyone was just kind of passively watching this thing. So I don't know if it was just me that didn't feel it. Maybe it was everyone else in there. I saw some people said, you know, they had an enjoyable time for what it is, but it wasn't true horror to me, and it wasn't up to the caliber of some of the previous entries in this franchise, and even for what the concept of the nun could be. As I said, like, as a character, the nun is a very creepy character. Religion always terrifies me anyway, so they've got that going for it. You talked about the premise, though, at the start about suspending your disbelief and, you know, just drive away, like, just leave. And that definitely is very prevalent in this movie. So the Vatican task the guy of, like, inspecting this place, and they recommend not Vera Farmiga, sorry, Tayte Farmiga's character of Sister Irene. They said, this girl's got to go with you because she's special, or she's shown some kind of promise. But you never really get a sense of why she's there. She doesn't particularly seem any different from any of the other nuns. They, like, could have said anyone. She hasn't even taken her vows at that point, so she's not an official nun. She's not an official sister. As far as religious horror films, the one that immediately comes to mind for me is The Exorcist. Did they have a exorcism scene of some description? They had elements of an exorcism scene. I can't go into that because there's spoilers. There is a slight one in the movie. It's a flashback to one of the characters where he may or may not have performed an exorcism on someone, and he's seeing visions of that person still around the place. But again, it's not really interwoven into the plot so much. It's kind of just a character trait, which is just used as a sort of like mini horror segment half hour into the movie. There's no kind of connective tissue between all these things. Also, because of that, things get really confusing. In that, when they get to this place, there's a few nuns there, and there's this creep. I guess this is going into spoilers now, but there's basically like the emperor of the nuns in a like a throne chair, similar kind of voice, kind of looks like a ring wraith, shrouded in secrecy. And they need to essentially speak to the nuns and ask if any haunted shit's been happening, despite the fact at that point so much horror shit has already happened. When they turn up there, there's a pool of blood on the floor where the nun hanged herself at the beginning of the movie. There's like dead bodies. It looks like a Tim Burton fever dream.
Interesting.
Like gravestones, ravens, dilapidated building, overgrown weeds. The place just looks evil. So like they say like, no, we need to confirm if this is still a holy place or if this has become an unholy place, despite seeing spectral visions of evil nuns that lunge towards them, kids with snakes coming out of their mouths, people getting buried alive, and everything else that goes along with it. All the way up until the end of the film, they go, we can now confirm that this is now a holy place. Spoiler alert, I guess. So that concept alone is quite ridiculous. Like, and especially, I'm going into spoilers now, I don't care. You kind of got my impression on the film anyway. They speak to like this creepy empress kind of nun who's like the head honcho of all the nuns, who you don't see her face. Her voice reminded me from Ghostbusters. Remember the very end where they're on top of the building and that chick comes down in the spandex and she's like, Gozer the barbarian, Gozer the destructor. She sounds exactly like that. That's her voice. I knew it reminded me of something. And they need to speak to all the nuns in the convent essentially. And she says like, you can't do that right now because nuns take a vow of silence from sunset all the way through to sunrise. So you're going to have to stay here for the night in our creepy chapel hotel. And then you can speak to them tomorrow. All the nuns are behind this giant wooden drawbridge kind of thing that lifts up like with like the chains. And it's all creepy. And they're just like so nonchalant about it. They just think like, oh, this happens in all churches, right? This is fine. There's honestly not really a lot else I have to say on this movie, to be honest. That everything's kind of just a disconnected mess of jump scares and kind of vaguely interwoven horror segments. A lot of dream sequences, a lot of visions. Was it real? Wasn't it real? To the point where at the very end of the film, it becomes very confusing. This is absolute spoiler warning now. They basically, oh, it gets so much more ridiculous. I just forgot something like what's the word? Not the linchpin, a MacGuffin. There's a MacGuffin in this film to beat the demon, which is absolutely ridiculous. So they discover that Valak is obviously a demon that was summoned years and years and years ago in the same church by an evil duke that had the church to himself. I don't know if it was like a castle at that point before it was converted. And he was doing some like evil voodoo spells, and he was summoning like a portal to hell to raise demons, because I guess that's what you have to do when you're an evil duke, right? Like, you've got nothing better to do. As he was summoning the demon, I guess like the Knights Templar kind of stormed in. The church's like armed forces charged in and banished the demon back with a drop of Jesus Christ's blood, which they have in a vial contained in like a glass sphere. It looks like the holy hand grenade from Monty Python.
Did they throw it?
No. I thought they were going to. I wish they did. Lobbeth thy holy hand grenade. We don't
must
get any...
count to 3. No more, no less.
We don't get any lobbying of thy holy hand grenade, unfortunately. What we do get is a MacGuffin that's so ridiculous in that, like, who got that? Who got the blood of Christ in a fairly modern-looking syringe kind of thing, housed in a glass case? Like,
imagine if I reckon it was just some street salesman. He's just like, yeah, I've got the blood of Christ here if you want it.
Right? Yeah. Like, I mean, I've never read the Bible. Like, I know some of the Bible stories, but to my knowledge, after Jesus was cut down from the cross, people just kind of like mopped his blood up in like a handkerchief or like a cloth rag or something. Probably to sell on ye olde eBay or in like a market town or something. I don't know. They have this thing. Where was I going with this thing? Okay, also they say to prevent the demon, to kind of like keep it like pushed back, they have to maintain a prayer vigil constantly throughout. Like, the nuns take shifts to like kneel in this like room looking up at the Virgin Mary, this giant crucifix, and they have to constantly keep praying consistently in order to keep the demon pushed back. Which they do, and it doesn't work the entire movie. Like, I don't know why they think that's working, because the demon still kills other nuns. There was actually this really cool scene which had a potential to be one of the best scenes in the movie, and they didn't do it how I wanted them to. So eventually they get the main nun character, not the villain nun, Sister Irene. They get her on the floor and they say, like, there's like a whole army of nuns, and they're like, pray with us. We need to like give all our like Jesus strength to push this demon back. Like, we need you, like every able-bodied nun like needs to get in this room right now. And they said, no matter what happens around you, no matter what you see, keep your eyes fixed on that cross and keep praying. And then all the music cut out and it was silent, and they're all like speaking in Latin and chanting and stuff. Now, if I was directing this scene, I would have utter silence. I would have looks of dread on people's faces and like a shadow or something patrolling in between all the aisles of the nuns, maybe getting closer to the camera towards the main character, maybe like resting its hand on her shoulder or something. But
what do they do?
Within like 10, 20 seconds, maybe not even that, boom, this huge like EMP shockwave goes off, which sends all the nuns flying into the walls and everything, and like kills some of them. Some smack their head off the concrete, leaving just her. And then she stands up and kind of like runs to the door because she hears Father Burke banging on the door trying to get in. She lets him in. She like gets like, come in and help me, like they're all in here. And he goes like, who's in here? And she turns around and there's no one in there. Like, there's no dead nuns. There's nothing. Before she got kind of her shawl ripped by the demon and a pentagram scratched onto her, that's all intact again. So it was kind of like a dream sequence. Like, it didn't really happen. There's lots of moments like that all the way through the movie, which really irritates me.
I feel like another thing that you sometimes get in modern horrors, subtle horror. It not being a big bombastic jump scare, not being big kind of massive, like I think the one thing that I've seen from the first Conjuring film was the clap. That was good.
Great. Yeah.
Subtle. So subtle, but something that is taken apart from this horror film wouldn't be scary.
Yeah.
Like, but in that sense, that film very, very like frightening. So I only have 2 questions just to close this off on. First of all, would you recommend this film?
Would I recommend this film? To a casual horror moviegoer, there are definitely worse horror films I've seen in recent years, like Ouija, for example. There's been countless horror movies that have come out recently which are really, really terrible. What was it, The Forest or whatever it was called, with Natalie Dormer from last year or the year before that. There are definitely worse horror movies out there, and the set pieces in this movie are very good. If you're looking for if jump scares do it for you, if you can go and see this movie and you want to go with friends and you want to jump at some scenes like, you know, every now and then, you'll probably like this movie and you'll probably think it's entertaining. However, I'm a bit of a horror snob. I'm a self-confessed horror snob. And even from just watching other entries in this franchise, The Conjuring 1, Conjuring 2, Annabelle Creation, I think they're vastly superior movies to this one. Each of those movies use jump scares, but they use them sparingly. They were effective when they did. Some didn't land, but the majority of them did. And it just established character better. There were moments, there were scenes where it was just 2 characters talking and establishing their character, making us connect with them, whilst also like the horror stuff then proceeded throughout the movie. This feels like a hodgepodge collection of scenes you could pretty much rearrange in the edit in any particular order. It wouldn't really have much bearing on the plot. And if you do like break this movie down to its most basic form in terms of the narrative, there really isn't much of a plot there. There's a very thin thread of a plot. In terms of how this connects to the Conjuring universe as a whole, there's a pointless kind of recap at the beginning of the film where they show the scene from Conjuring 2 where they first start talking about the nun, which I thought was mostly pointless. The very end of the movie does directly tie into The Conjuring 1 and establishes and fleshes out the lore a bit more with it, with the character of Frenchie linking now into The Conjuring and Vera Farmiga's character, which I thought was pretty cool. But again, if you're going to this as a casual fan, if you haven't seen The Conjuring, you're going to be scratching your heads over those scenes, which could be alleviated if you did chop off the first, the bookend scenes at the beginning of the film. Casual fan, go and see it. If you're a fan of some of the Conjuring movies, I think it feels kind of been there, done that. You can kind of telegraph every jump scare. I never jumped once in this movie. I never once felt fearful in this movie. And I'm going to be honest, I did during some moments of The Conjuring 2. I did during some moments of Annabelle Creation. It really got me. This, it felt by the numbers. Classic misdirection where like the camera will focus on one thing and then pan and then boom. You can predict all the jump scares. At least I can. Maybe some people can't if you are a casual horror movie goer. If you've seen a lot, if you kind of understand the structure and the kind of formula that goes into horror movies, you'll get that as well. We now have 2 Tates apparently on the chat, which is very strange.
Sorry. No, I cut out there for a second. I have absolutely no idea what happened.
We've got 1 Tate frozen in time and then we have 1 live Tate.
Beautiful.
Oh God, he's turning into the nun. He's cloning himself.
No, my final question, which I was going to close off on, was: can you just stick Scooby-Doo on the case?
It feels like it at this point. Like, why not? Maybe that'll be the next spin-off. When we get
wait, so we're getting an R-rated Scooby-Doo. I would be okay with that completely.
Like when we get to, what would the next spin-off be? What's another monster? They haven't done the Crooked Man, who was in The Conjuring 2. So when we get the Crooked Man movie, get Scooby-Doo and Shaggy, Velma, Daphne, and Fred on the case, and you'll have a good movie. And we'll have our Scooby-Doo spin-off, reboot, whatever you want to call it.
Awesome.
But yeah,
okay.
So
yes, that's it.
I guess I'll close out. So that'll do it for our review on The Nun. I think this one might get a few dislikes. I think there's going to be a lot of angry fans about this one. But let me know what you thought of The Nun. Did you like it? Are you kind of with me that you didn't like it? What are your views on any of the other entries in the Conjuring universe? It feels so weird calling it that now, but I guess that's what it is. Yeah, any comments, we'll go through them and we'll reply to them all when we can. In an hour and a half, we're going live for another show tonight, Battle of the Brackets, which is our original show where we pick a given subject and we argue it over until we have one winner. Tonight, we're going to be arguing for which is the best summer blockbuster. If you check back on our social media, probably within an hour, we'll have an updated image. It's our favorite show to do on the channel, so we highly recommend everyone sticking around for that because it will definitely be good fun. There's other shows happening as well. I'll be getting back into trailer reactions before too long as well. So please hit that subscribe button, hit the bell icon as well so you get a notification every time we go live. That'll do it for us. Until the next video in an hour and a half's time, we'll see you then. See you guys.